join us on stage. In this session, our panel will explore some of the fundamental pillars of governance excellence, transparent decision-making frameworks, and ethical leadership models. The session will also address the evolving landscape of governance in the digital age, providing insights on leveraging technology, embracing diversity, and adapting to regulatory changes. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, I'm going to be handing it over to Samantha. So one more time, without further ado, can we give them another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen? Samantha. So Samantha will be taking over the stage. Samantha, you'll be introducing your panelists, and the stage is yours. Enjoy.
Thank you so much. All right, so welcome everyone. I know it's really so great of you to take your time off to come for this session, right? So as the MC has alluded to just now, this session will be very interesting because it's about governance excellence, right? We have talked about governance since year 2000. It's already 24 years, right? So what has evolved? What is the trend now? And how do you actually step up in terms of governance? So we are very lucky today. We have 4 industry leaders here, all right, who will be sharing with us. And we will open up at the end of the session for Q&A for all of you, right? So you can get your questions ready. But in the meanwhile, let me just introduce you our esteemed speakers here. So first of all, myself is from Boardroom. So I'm actually the country head for Boardroom Malaysia. I'm also the CS head for Boardroom Asia. All right. So our first speaker here is our first panelist, Kenneth Foo Pokian, and he is the founder of KL Management and Secretarial Services. Mr. Kenneth Foo is a respected member of MISA. He's very active and a frequent speaker at MISA events. All right. Okay. And next, we are honored to have Ms. Ui Suan Kim, who served as the honorary treasurer for the Inns of Court Malaysia. By profession, Ms. Kim is a barrister as well as an advocate and solicitor of O.S. Kim and Associate. Okay, all right. Our third panelist, Mr. Krishman Varghese, Director of Governance, Regulatory and Sustainability Services at Deloitte Malaysia. So, Mr. Krishman, I've known him for a long time, and he's sort of like one of the guru of corporate governance in Malaysia. All right, so we're very lucky to have him here to share with us all his wealth of knowledge and experience. Last but not least, let us welcome Ms. Sharon Goh, and she's the visionary founder of Srin Zen's Resources. Ms. Sharon Goh's expertise and leadership in the tech industry are truly commendable. And this is very interesting because what has technology got to do with governance professional or company secretary? All right, so let's welcome all of them. All right, so let's start the session. Mr. Kenneth Foo. Yes. If you can perhaps share with us, what are your thoughts on governance excellence?
Thank you, Samantha, for the question, and good evening to everyone. Thank you for the invitation. And I didn't know that I suddenly got roped in as one of the leaders in this governance so-called field. You know, I consider myself just a small fish swimming in the pool, despite my weight. So definitely, it's an honor to be here. Now, on my thoughts on excellence in governance, to me, I'm always relating back to roots, or rather fundamentals. To me, as far as it's concerned, when we talk about excellence in governance, we still go back to the pillars of good governance, which is, of course, accountability, responsibility, transparency, and fairness. These are all the pillars. And as far as my practice is concerned, I do serve a lot of SMEs, medium and small and medium enterprises. And what I notice is that, especially from the context of Malaysian SMEs and whatnot, in terms of governance, it has improved a lot. Contrast in my time when I started in this line back in 1986. That means pretty old, isn't it? 1986, that I joined this profession, and contrast with now, I can see a appreciable difference in terms of number one, clients do recognize the value of a good company secretary. And of course, being a secretary is not just a secretary anymore. We are now a governance professional. Not just a person who's just a chief administrative officer. Not really anymore, because clients do value my input. They inform their employees, they inform their partners, they inform their other stakeholders that, oh, I need to check this with my secretary. Now, I don't think that I heard these sort of comments back in 1986 or even in early 1990s. But now they do. They do consult me. Now, the other thing is that, of course, this is also due to so much regulatory changes. And we got to thank the regulator on this aspect, especially all these changes in terms of governance, in terms of compliance. And that has made our job, in a sense, more sustainable, because clients do need us. They know that, especially now with all these changes, AMLA, the banks are getting very strict about any transaction. Number two, of course, SSM has introduced again all this new beneficial ownership framework. Now that certainly makes the client realizes that they depend on us. They got to go through us to ensure that their company is in compliance with all these changes. So that's my take on governance. Yeah,
Right.
that's right.
Thanks, Kenneth. So you have heard from Kenneth Hu how the role of company secretary has actually evolved, right, into corporate governance, directly or indirectly. Suddenly you are required or requested by boards of companies, right, to advise them more and more in terms of corporate governance, not just company secretary. All right, now, we have had code on corporate governance for public listed companies since year 2000. 24 years, all right? And it's very interesting that now Securities Commission Malaysia has just issued a consultation paper, all right, regarding draft governance code for Malaysia for the micro, small, medium enterprises. Maybe if I can invite Krishman, maybe if you can share with us, what are the key highlights of under this code for the SME, and how do you propose how do you think the proposed code can help to strengthen the resilience of SMEs in the industry? Yep.
Thank you, Samantha, for the kind introduction and the question. And also thank you, the organizers, for inviting me here today. Pleasure to speak at this event. Indeed, the code, or rather the draft code on corporate governance for MSMEs is very timely. As we all know, MSMEs are a pervasive fixture in the Malaysian economy. It constitutes something like 97% of the business establishments in Malaysia, about 40% of the national GDP. So it's very prevalent. It's a force to be reckoned in the Malaysian economy. And they're also part of the broader ecosystem in Malaysia. So firstly, we should recognize that many MSMEs are also vendors to multinational companies, public listed companies, government linked companies. So they are part of that ecosystem, their value chain. And with rising ESG consciousness, a lot of companies are actually imposing standards on sustainable procurement. So they need to meet a minimum vendor criteria, or the baseline vendor criteria. As such, this document is actually a very useful frame of reference for MSMEs to adopt. And secondly, many SMEs are also part of a broader group. They are subsidiaries or associate companies of listed companies. So as part of instituting governance across that value chain or across the business verticals, large companies or parent companies can actually use this frame of reference and as a point of reference, as a frame of reference to institute governance practices amongst these SMEs. And also, thirdly, it's a useful foundational document that MSMEs can reference and also institute good governance practices, especially as they seek to tap financing from banks, from capital markets. So because banks, financial institutions look at your governance processes before they grant financing, and recent reports show that across developing economies, I think about 40% of SMEs have about close to 5 trillion USD in unmet financing needs, and governance could be a solution to all these. And in terms of the key highlights of the code, what's very interesting is that this code tiers the practices for M, S, M, and also E. So it's very customized, it's unique and fit for purpose for the various entities, and it's actually divided into the two parts. So the first part is actually the tiered practices for the various categories, and the second part is more of blanket better practices for all SMEs that can adopt. And this code is actually voluntary in nature, so there's a lot of confusion because people find the reference to mandatory in the document. So they said, I thought this document is actually a voluntary document, why is it signpost to mandatory requirement? So the first part actually references to mandatory requirement, and it's also signposted to recommended practices denoted by R there. So the mandatory requirements are actually legislative requirements. So the code itself is voluntary, but it makes reference to mandatory requirements. Like so these are non-negotiable practices. So for example, you have to act in the best interest of the company as a director. So this is something that's non-negotiable. So this is a mandatory requirement. You have to ensure ethical conduct. You can't engage in bribery. So these are mandatory requirements. So the recommended practices are better practices. For example, to adopt a constitution, to have a board charter, to embrace diversity principles. So these are recommended better practices, and it's also tiered. So the second part is a blanket adoption of practices, which is encouraged for all MSMEs. And there are certain carve-outs for larger MSMEs. And this code is actually introduced by the SME working group. So it's interesting to note in the broader development of the nation, there's a working group who is looking at MSMEs. This has been an underserved market, typically gone under the radar. Now we have SC looking at them, who is chairing the SME working group. We have SME Corp. We also have the Ministry of Entrepreneur and Cooperative Development, who is also part of this working group as well. So many entities are looking at this, and it's also part of the broader gamut of documents that have been released for MSMEs. I think if we look at earlier this year, late last year, there are some other documents like the quick guide, ESG quick guide, which was issued by SME Corp. Then we have Capital Markets Malaysia, CM Square, which is also an arm under SC, which have also issued a simplified ESG guide for MSMEs. But not to forget, before all this, MICSA actually came up with a corporate governance guide for non-listed companies way back in May 2023. So MICSA had that foresight way back in 2023 to look at MSMEs. So round of applause for MICSA. I think I'll stop there.
Yeah. Thanks, Krishman. So when you hear the corporate governance code for SME, I wonder what is your first thought? Is it something new? Is it going to be very challenging for the SME to actually adopt, right? But you must think back, when Security Commissions, I think it was 2 years back, they have already issued group-wide corporate governance framework, meaning to say, even if you're a public listed company entity, you have, let's say, 100 subsidiaries under the group, rightfully, you should then make sure even the subsidiaries all are adopting the corporate governance code then, all right? It's just that with this now, they have put in a lot of more specific examples and areas where the directors, so it's very interesting to note, just now Krishman mentioned, they put there is mandatory, right? It's a key principles, all right? How do you then adopt, what are the best practices relevant to your company, your industry, all right? And it's also very interesting that when you talk about the mandatory requirement, then where is the disclosure? Because at the moment, it's more of the group, public listed company, they need to disclose in the annual report, right? So these are some of the things that you need to perhaps really look into to get ready in preparation of this code, which will be rolled out by the Securities Commission, all right? Okay, maybe just now I think somebody have also touched on the more and more stringent regulatory requirement. So perhaps if I can invite our specialist, your subject matter expert here, with regard to, okay, sorry, just let me, commercial, the reason, if I can invite, Swan Kim here, in terms of the key developments and trends in commercial cases in courts, in terms of corporate governance excellence, right, vis-a-vis balancing of economic growth. If you can touch on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Samantha. I think when we look at the overarching theme of governance excellence, we are looking back to basics. And when you actually look back to basics, it's about getting the answers to the questions. So it's really simple as that. If your clients tell you a lot of things, but you still don't get the answer, then that's something wrong. So that's what I think it's all about. So as directors, as company secretaries, as local agents for foreign companies, same thing. Who is actually your client, right? If we look at the developments and trends in courts, okay, let's look at directors, for example. So the law does not make any distinction between non-executive or executive directors. They're all jointly and severally liable. So you may have a lot of directors in the company, each have their own individual respective portfolios, but it does not matter because when the liability comes, it's all. So it doesn't matter whether, you are a sleeping director, nominee director, executive, non-executive. The Companies Act actually sets that out very clearly. So I picked up a couple of cases just to talk about the trends. Section 2, Companies Act, and back in 2005, Lembaga Kemajuan Wang Simpanan Pekerja, already the court has said that directors of the company are all jointly, severally liable. And then a recent Court of Appeal decision in Augustine T.K. James also affirmed a 2008 Ravi Chantaran case, which says, assuming that the plaintiff is a non-executive director, nevertheless, he's still a director in the eyes of the law. His roles and duties are governed by the Companies Act. So what does this really tell us? Sometimes, it's easy to deflect your roles and responsibilities. Oh, I don't know. Director B is actually more in charge of the financial management. But the law does not really bother. It does not discriminate. Section 245 of the Companies Act gives absolute power to all directors to inspect the company's bank statements, the records, and all the books. So if we want to get on board, we really have to make sure that we really know what's going on, because otherwise the local enforcement agents will, our enforcement regulators, the agencies will come and say, we need to have a session with you, and you say, I don't know much, but it doesn't matter. So that's one aspect of it. I picked up Section 17A as well of the MACC Act. Same thing, corporate liability. You have to know really what your officers are doing, because if they start offering bribes to third parties, everyone's in trouble. And, it's jail terms. The fines are 10 times more? Yeah. And then we had a little discussion earlier with Samantha. I think probably all of you would have read the Concrete Parade case, federal court. It's a 100-over-page judgment. Please read it if you can. It's really power-packed. That is a game changer. It sets out clearly the roles of directors and shareholders. So you see a power play there. The law delicately balances the rights of shareholders in terms of their preemptive rights, as well as the management and directors' rolls in their entrepreneurial spirit. So of course, when we are on boards, we are looking to raise financing, issue new shares and all. But at which point of time do you actually need to call for the general meeting? So it's quite exciting. The suit was filed as an oppression suit, interestingly, Section 346 of your Companies Act. Concrete Parade, they lost first at High Court. They won at the Court of Appeal. But at Federal Court, lost again. So something about lawsuits and litigation, arbitration, it's the long haul. You may win at one level, you may lose at the other level. So I always tell all my lawyers, when we win today, please don't get overly excited because our friend, the opponent's going to file an appeal within 30 days. And I always say, don't jinx it. And then if we lose, also don't despair. There's always the rights of appeal. So I must say that courts have generally been very pro-business, if you see. So Concrete Parade actually sets out how we interpret sections 75, 85, the preemptive rights, and section 223, which is acquisition and disposal. So that's really exciting. So then, okay, I do have my flexibility as the board to decide, especially for heads of agreements. And then conditional upon shareholders' general meeting when the actual acquisition or disposal or the merger is going to happen. I think that's really sensible. Yeah. So I'd like to commend our judiciary because I think Malaysia is really on the right direction. We've always been pro-businesses. And even though stringent regulations and laws have been in place, but that is to ensure everybody's rights are protected. And the Companies Act has always been undergoing massive changes. The latest one, as Samantha and Kenneth earlier said, the beneficial ownership, which is excellent if you ask me, because very frankly, we ask ourselves, who are behind these companies? Do we know? Do we really know? Because there's so many shell companies above and above and above and above. But if you really trace it down, drill it down, then you say, haha. And criteria C is very exciting. Yeah, criteria C, does it mean that, the puppet masters are also the beneficial owners? So it's quite exciting. So you're giving the companies back a chance to reveal to you as a company secretary, okay, who is the real beneficial owner here? And SSM is very strict about this. So the register is there. Have any of you went into the eBoss? eBoss, yeah? It's actually quite easy to use. Yeah, eBoss, yeah. So, yeah. And sometimes you think as company secretaries, are our fees commensurate with the amount of responsibilities and accountability? Yeah, that's for another day. Thank you.
Thanks, Wan Kim. Thank you so much. I think everybody is very happy to hear the Concrete Parade case now. There is a conclusion, all right? I think, was it 2 years back when it first came out and they lost the case, company secretary was scrambling to amend the AGM notice then, remember? And putting in the preemptive clause. And then suddenly we have this very good news. It's really something that I think a lot of us, as company secretary or as corporate governance professional, we really look forward to that. Because why? It distincts the fiduciary duties of directors and the share owners. And interestingly, just now we talked about the draft code for MSME. Interestingly is the consultation paper actually talk about the fiduciary duties of not just directors, but owners and partners in the company. So we're not sure how the final code will come out, but this is where you need to think about it. It's no longer just about directors' fiduciary duty, but all the other stakeholders. How do you play your role? How do you carry out your fiduciary duties, right? So look at the code not so much as, oh, it's another law, another requirement, but as a tool. How do you actually leverage on this tool, right? So, so it's very, very interesting, all these coming changes that is happening. If I could just invite, later I will come back on the BO. I know a lot of you have a lot of questions on the recent change on the e-boss. It's exciting, but at the same time, it's quite stressful for a lot of company secretaries. So we'll cover that later. But if I could just invite Sharon Goh to talk about what is your expectation regarding the integration of technology, because we talk about evolution, right? How the corporate governance have actually evolved. We have talked about it since 24 years, right? So how do you actually integrate technology into company secretary environment, and how do you envision the transformation unfolding?
Hello, everyone. By the way, I'm Sharon Goh. If you can't remember my name, just remember my hair. Okay, it's very simple. So somehow or other, when I was being invited for this panel session, I was like, "Are you sure you're inviting the right person or not?" I'm not in this industry. Whatever the section that they mentioned, I was like floating in the air already. But as a business owner myself, I do understand a little bit about all the acts and things like that, because we need to know what our responsibility is. But my role here today is not to comment about the act, or not to comment about what are the changes on the company act or things like that, or the UBO. But I'm here to share my thoughts a little bit on the tech side. What the company secretary can actually leverage on tech in order to actually speed up the whole process, or even to get the message down the floor. I was very honored that I joined a session yesterday. If you have know that they have KL20 yesterday, a very big event in KLCC. So there were a lot of VCs from international level that came in, and there were a huge amount of investment coming in to actually penetrate on the digitalization side of industry, and also on the chip industry, because the chip right now is very, very hot topic right now. But our topic today is not to discuss about that. It's to discuss about the encouragement of a lot of VCs and a lot of startups to actually set up their base here in Malaysia. So now, my question here is, the first thing they touch base if they were to set up the company in Malaysia, nevertheless, are all the audience here. So you guys are the first touch point that all these startups and the company will actually set up the company with your. So, and also, there were new package and incentive being given out yesterday, visas, speed up process and all these things. So if we still carry on with the traditional way of operating, of opening a company account or set up a new company, I bet we will not able to meet the timeline. So, but with the tech evolvement kicking in the industry, it will definitely speed up the process of setting up a company. Instead of physical document mailing here and there, signing signatures here and there. But if you can replace it with technology, give an example, digital signature. So that is a very good invention, I should personally say. Because previously when I set up my company in 1998, don't start counting how old I am. Okay, so during those days, right, if you have a lot of company directors, the document has to be career here, career there, everyone were to sign and ended up, it landed on the table of a COSAC, then they can start filing it. So imagine on the cost involved and also the time frame involved. If you can actually do it in a few clicks, right, that will actually save up a lot of cost. Because I have, luckily enough, I have a very friendly COSAC that have worked together for many, many years. I have never changed. Okay, they are like friends to me. They update me with all the changes. Of course, not every single act like what the gentlemen all here mentioned. But the most important part, what I was being notified, but in a verbal model. Like we come out, we have a coffee chat. That's where I got my update from. Imagine if you can actually have all the act, okay, in the system, or in a software or a dashboard, whichever, you can have one push notification and all the latest information. Of course, you don't give them the 200 over pages one. Just give them the most important one that the business owner need to know. Just push a fast notification to them. Then they have no more excuses to put a finger on you saying that, I don't know. I wasn't being notified. I wasn't know that there's a change of this act. So ended up, they won't put a finger on the COSAC. Right. I mean, and the sad part of the story is, I have some COSAC friend told me, right, whenever they need to open a bank account, whenever they need to set up a company, we are the first people that they come and approach. I guess every one of you have the same feeling. But whenever it comes to payment, we are always the last in the list. I'm not too sure whether how everyone feel, but that is the conversation that we had. So imagine that if this kind of payment automated or e-payment were to actually implant into the system itself, if you can push the notification to your client, hey, click this link, make this payment to me, pay first, do later, how good it is, right? Right or not? I mean, you automate everything. So on all the payment, give them all the e-wallets, all the credit card, all the FPX. They have no more excuses not to pay you. Boss, you're on the road, I know, but you have e-wallet, right? But always click the button and pay to me. So that is a little bit of insights of how digital transformation or digitalization were to be implanted into this industry itself. Back to you, Samantha.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. So I think it's really interesting to hear this and why we have invited Sharon. So she mentioned she's not sure, but I told her, look, company secretary industry is one of the industry that don't really adopt technology much. So what does that mean? It means there's a lot of opportunity, all right, to improve efficiency, productivity, so that the professional company secretary can then focus, right, pivot to playing a more corporate governance professional role, rather than doing data entry, right? So you talk about the e-boss, all right, maybe I can invite Kenneth, right, to share. I think the e-boss is something, is so tedious. There's so much data that you need to enter into. But have any one of you thought about using AI? How can we leverage on technology, right, to make it seamless, less painful, right? So think about that, right, in order to leverage on the change. And Sharon has pointed out just now, the KL20 is very interesting, right? It talks about funds even being made available now for the investment, right? So how can you as company secretary leverage on that? All right, so if I may, Kenneth, if you can share in terms of the e-boss.
Well, as far as e-boss is concerned, I had the so-called chance to do it this afternoon. You know, when I realized that the system had become stable. Because early morning when I was logging in, the e-boss, when I was keying in, just on one person's particular, imagine it took me about 20 minutes and I still could not save it. You know why? Because the reason is that almost up to completion of that person's data, and the message now comes out expired. You know, the whole system just say expired, and I have to log in again, go back to the home page, and then go to the dashboard, on again. So I gave up after about 30 minutes, just on one case only, one company. Until after lunch, about 2 something, and when I realized that system now is stable, wow, I quickly key in about 5 companies, all the data. It was a group. It was a group company where the beneficial owner was that principal person in himself. Husband and wife company, quite a simple thing for me to do. But nevertheless, the thing that as far as EBO is concerned, we are not here to go and talk about, I think, the system. Right, to me, I think the issue, or rather the benefit of this beneficial ownership system is that it enables regulator to know who are the owners or controller of the company. But most important for company secretaries, we are now able to know who we are dealing with actually. Rather than in the past, those directors who may be nominees, just giving us some excuse and say that I'm the director, I'm the shareholder, but then we start to realize something does not end up somewhere. You know, asking for certain directions or instructions, this director and shareholder say, you hold on first, I have to check this and check this. Well, I was thinking that if you are a 50% shareholder as well as director, why are you checking something which is quite a simple matter? You know, definitely that means this person may be taking some instruction from further up or further away. You know, so that's where we get a bit concerned that who are we dealing with actually? And in light of all these cases on money laundering, especially when you look at Singapore's so-called money laundering case involving that 10 or 11 individuals, and they were using about few hundred companies, paying nominee directors $50 per month. Now, I was thinking that, of course, nothing to do with our neighbor, but definitely I was realizing that I wouldn't be able to get a nominee director in Malaysia and pay that guy 50 ringgit per month, I think this shows how cheap the nominee director services in Singapore is, isn't it? Compared to Malaysia, I wouldn't be able to get a nominee director to serve me or my client for 50 ringgit per month, which is only 600 ringgit per annum. So now, back to that point about the money laundering case in Singapore, the evidence and of course the investigators' report reveal so much about how these nominee directors did not know what actually the company was doing. Another even interesting case was that this particular guy, who was supposed to be the CEO, the investigating officer asked him, "Where is your place of business?" "I'm not really sure." My God, you're the CEO, you don't know where your company is operating. Where's the place of business? And who are the bank signatories? He doesn't even know. That means he's just holding the title of CEO, but somebody is running the show. So this is where I find that SSM's implementation of this beneficial ownership reporting system has given us a lot of momentum in terms of improving governance at all levels. Definitely that when I convey the changes of the act and of course the new reporting framework to my client, they are very, very happy with what I'm informing them. At the same time, they have been very cooperative, forthcoming, and providing me details. Because as far as the EBO system is concerned, it is not just asking for details about the person's identity. It has gone to more detail rather than, for example, asking for nationality, citizenship, contact number, email address. All these are compulsory fields of information. Previously, I was just asking them for the address and contact number, but now not only contact number, email address. Now, the other thing is that nationality and citizenship. Of course, on that point also, perhaps our regulator may be, sometime I realize, a bit overkill. Because if you look at it from the legal point of view, nationality and citizenship may be two different things. It's not automatically that my citizenship is Malaysian, but my nationality may not be Malaysian. Just a simple example would be a Korean, a Korean person. We have our council member, I'm not sure whether she's here, whose nationality I would say considered to be a Korean. But her citizenship is definitely Malaysian. So there you have it. You can't just make assumption that my citizenship is Malaysian, but my nationality may not be Malaysian. So I would consider that a bit overkill. You are getting too much information in one go, which is maybe also a little bit of burden on companies as well. Yeah. At the same time, I think we got to balance transparency with the ease of doing business. You can't just go for the sake of transparency and then you overburden businesses, then nobody would be willing to set up business. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kenneth. So you've heard from Kenneth the real challenges in terms of compliance, right? But I think we all know after all the cases that has happened recently in Singapore, how company secretary are being, made use of, right, for anti-money laundering. So this is where you have to think, right? Think twice when you accept a client, right? How do you discharge your duty? And I mean, Kenneth has mentioned about the ease of getting data. Even ourselves, sometimes it's very difficult because we have clients from US, for example, who tell us, hey, all this data you're asking, there is PDPA issue. I can't even give you a photocopy of the passport, right? So the amendment to the Companies Act help us, right, to discharge our role and duties. Why? Because now we can tell the client, this is now a mandatory requirement. The company, right, and the beneficial owner, you have now the obligation to do so. You must do it, all right? The only thing is, how do you as company secretary and as governance professional discharge that duty? How do you make sure you have sufficient supporting documents, right? If anything goes to court, do you have those audit trail, right? In terms of who gives you the information or the confirmation, supposedly, because under the new act amendment, there's no more exemption. Under the previous one, there is exemption given for public listed companies and various entities. Under the new amendment now, there's no more exemption. So you need to disclose who is the UBO. And if there's none, you need to determine who is the senior management. And even that, we have had challenges because we have senior management, local entity who say, no, I'm not the BO, right? You need to talk to my senior management at the ultimate holding company level. So these are the real challenges, right? So, Swanky, if I may invite you to just share your thought on the legal requirement for this disclosure at UBO and how can the company secretary discharge their duty, because we now have no more 3 months, 2.5 months to submit this information to the regulator.
Thank you. I think the deadline is 30th June, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so we are on our toes, very obviously. And I think what is quite important is when we onboard, take a client, I think we are now in a position to say, I need to see who is our actual client. Yeah, because, it's a no-go. If I don't know who our actual client is, who is signing the papers, I need to be convinced myself first. So then, in the event it goes to court, like Samantha correctly says, we can look at the judge straight in his or her eyes and give the answers. That's why this boils down to what I said earlier. Do we have the answers to the questions? Very simple. If you don't have the answers, then that's fine. Don't take up the case. It's okay. It's okay. You need to sleep well at night. So, yeah, to discharge your duty effectively as a company secretary, even as a lawyer, because lawyers are also gateways, same as company secretaries. Yeah, we're gateways to a lot of strange things happening that we don't even know. I think if you guys read the Concrete Parade case again, towards the last few pages of the judgment, the federal court was very strict in stating that the Section 346 oppression section was used for a collateral purpose. No, those are very, very harsh words, collateral purpose. So you can see the trends of courts. They do not like abusive claims. If you are going on a sort of a tangent where you're asserting pressure, but for collateral purpose, I think better don't go ahead. You have to pick your fights correctly. So make sure your paper trail is there, your documentation. Let the client sign all the necessary documents over and above what is required. And then if they get into trouble, you don't get into trouble, because then we can actually present our case very responsibly. that, yeah, I have taken all necessary measures to ensure that we have found out everything. Back to the basic KYC, but extending more than that. So I think the beneficial ownership thing, it's a game changer. Yeah. But balancing that with the requirements, I know, yeah, the passport and all, but we just got to explain it to them. But I think if they see the business sense, right, then yes. The only problem is they start saying, are you sure? Then, okay, I mean, then it's your call. Yeah.
Thanks, Wan Kim. So before I move on further, maybe do I have any questions from the floor? What keeps you awake, right? What is the most urgent things or at the back of your mind, that keeps you awake day in, day out? Use this opportunity. We have all the industry leaders here, all right? Maybe while waiting for you, maybe you can, if you are too shy to raise or stand up, if you can write in a piece of paper and then pass to our secretariat, then we will try to answer as many of those questions as possible. So, sorry, just in case I miss anyone. Is there anyone? Yes. Sorry, can somebody pass the mic over here, the front?
Thank you very much. My name is Ibrahim Sani. I'm from Yayasan Peneraju. One thing that keeps me up at night is how does this principles can be applied or be impressed upon our youth in our organizations, considering that being a corporate secretary or company secretary and corporate governance is never the top 10 or even the top 100 of what our youth is thinking when it comes to working in an organization, especially when it comes to non-listed organizations. So how do we impress upon the young to actually appreciate these kind of context when it comes to good governance and this behavior to be inculcated? Thanks.
All right, thank you. It's a very challenging question, right? Because how the youth think and our veteran is very different. What tickles them, right? When you talk about corporate governance. But interestingly is, there are some university we speak to. There are 300 students. So we did raise the question as well. How do you engage them, right? So I'm not sure. Sharon, or Krishman, you would like to take that? Yes.
Ken. It's a very interesting question. I can remember at the UN Security Council meeting, somebody once quipped on the Secretary General, I hope that you will be more of a general and less of a secretary. So that goes to underscore the negative connotation and perception that people commonly have about secretary. They are very administrative in nature. But the challenge here is how do you make them more general, more forceful? And over the years, we are seeing actually some changes whereby company secretaries are now known as governance officers. They are being given positions in the management hierarchy. They are positioned at the top. They are positioned at the top echelon of the companies. And also, with the proliferation of technology, we are seeing a lot of advances. So even in my space in consulting, this business is booming in terms of governance advisory. So this is another space that maybe the young ones may be interested to venture into, how we leverage on technology, generative AI to create, for example, a digital board effectiveness evaluation tool where now companies can use generative AI and try to understand the psyche of directors, the persona of directors, how the boardroom chemistry works, and what's the trickle-down effect to the management of the company. So traditional ways of doing things are being disrupted. In fact, just to share an anecdote on board evaluation exercise where directors rate their members and how effective they are. In one company where we were looking at a governance review exercise, the board scored the nomination committee 100%. So we were so amazed. Oh, the nomination committee scored 100%. So we went and spoke to the directors. And one of the independent director actually stood up and said, did you know the nomination committee did not even meet last year? So I got shocked. So then how did the board members actually rate them 100, right? So it's all you scratch my back, I scratch your back, exercise through forms and all. So now with technology, we are able to pull data like meeting attendance, other variables, and also analyze from a broader perspective how effective is the board, whether they are just attending internal trainings, external trainings. So all this information, the copious amount of information being disclosed in annual reports, how do you pull? So with technology, with greater positioning at the management level, and also with the cloud that company secretaries have now to be able to influence boardroom proceedings, I think it's becoming a lot more appealing. At least that was the appeal to me when I joined this space.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Krishman. Kenneth?
If I may add on to that, now I'm happen to be the secretary of this organization in our national language called Yayasan Pusat Beli Antara Bangsa lah. So in English called International Youth Council. That the company is set up in 1985 by our prime minister at that time with the sponsorship of a Japanese philanthropist. Now, I've been involved as a company secretary for this organization for the past about 10 years. And their chairman is always traditionally the Secretary General of the Ministry of Youth and Sports. Now, as far as youth is concerned, I think it's always about the impression, as we say, impressionable young mind. Now, how do we really convince the youth and the young about the so-called relevance of governance and, of course, our profession? The way I see is that we have to be role models. Too many times, I think I noticed that a lot of company secretary, my compatriot, goes around complaining. You know, it seems to be that they're always grumbling that we are not respected. We are always being, perceived to be on a different lower level. Our fees are not high and whatnot. Now, that is definitely not something I encourage. Throughout my talks, I've always been encouraging secretaries, stand tall, stand proud. You know, don't always compare. You know, once you start comparing, in Chinese we have a saying, and you know that comparing. Well, if you want to compare a mountain, how can you compare a mountain with Mount Everest? But then again, is Mount Everest really the highest mountain? I'm not sure. You know, nobody have really done a total measurement, contrast with the mountain under the sea or the ocean. Do we have been seen that or not? I'm not sure we have done that or not. So the way that things are being compared is definitely not something advisable. To me, being a secretary, stand tall, stand proud, display your competence, improve your knowledge, have a good grasp of your fundamentals. Then you're able to impress your client. And then you're able to impress upon your team of people. And with that, whenever we talk to younger people, they are really amazed that, I thought secretary is, making coffee or tea. Wow, the way that you are carrying yourself, wow, definitely is a very respected profession. That's what I want to be doing. And the way that I see this International Youth Council, they are doing so much leadership program for the youth. You know, and rightly so, because youth is our future. The youth is our future. And for MISA, that's where we have come in and introduced the Young Governance Award. You know, so that through this publicity and the award itself, we give message to the university students, college students, and the young in general, that this profession is no longer just been about a company secretary. Yeah? We are now a corporate governance professional. Yeah, so that's my take on that.
Thanks, Kenneth.
Samantha, if I may add, right?
Yeah.
Standing in the middle of two generations, I consider myself the old generation. But because of the tech ecosystem, nevertheless, most of the employees are younger than me. I'm the old dinosaur So you definitely have to speak their language. And during our generation, you never see this kind of position, chief of staff, head of culture. There is no such thing. But we have seen more and more weird and odd title coming out. So this is where to bridge the communication between the management and also the younger generation. To add in on this, right, to spice it up, right, when it comes to ESG, maybe Malaysia is not that advanced yet. But if you really look at the West, right, or even US, the younger generation comes in for interview, they will ask you, what is the ESG practice in the company? Right, this is the question that they will ask. Even as normal investors, we call it consumers or retail investors, they will also look into a company ESG practice before they make any investment. So when it comes to the G and S side, right, what the corporate can do, they can actually, I've seen one company in one of the power chat, is very, I mean, you can do it as a case study as well as a reference. They have a whistleblower policy in the company itself. Very weird how they form the whistleblower team, right? Management not allowed to be in it. Only the executive level and that range can be in the whistleblower team. So what happened is, they know their rights, they know what should be practiced, and what is right, what is wrong. Instead of you telling them, you do this, you don't do this, they will never listen. But when you give them the rights to practice, then they will know how to govern their own position or even the company benefits at all time. So when they found out anything, they don't blow to the management, they blow to the owner. They have the rights to blow direct to the owners. To me, I've looked at this whistleblowing policy is quite well established because, in fact, if you really look from the top right, it's like 360 review. You can review me, I can review you as well. I can go straight to the owners. So this is what a little bit of comment I can give.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'll just share a little bit of my thoughts on this. I think the power of collaboration is very important. Yeah, so in Court Malaysia, for example, our membership base also comprised of students. So it's judges, lawyers, general counsels, basically legal professionals, academicians, jurists, and also students. So we have a whole spectrum of law professionals. There's our UITM expert over there, Prof. Hatini. Yeah, she has hundreds and hundreds of students under them. And corporate governance also is one of their subject matters. So MICSA's Executive Council has also been to one of our events at Johor, University of Reading, Malaysia. And that was an excellent exposure for the students to hear about ESG and to meet the Executive Council of MICSA. And I think they had a very different impression about corporate governance after meeting you all, right, Dato'? So that's the power of collaborations. If we reach out to the universities, vis-a-vis the universities also know about the power of networking with MICSA, with boardroom, with lawyers, with the members, and we cross-cut across to reach out, I think we can reach out to the young, and they will know the power of corporate governance excellence.
Okay. Thanks so much. I think it's at everyone's heart here when you talk about how do you motivate, how do you inspire the young generation, right? Not just company secretary, but corporate governance, right? So I think you have heard from our four esteemed panelists here. I think most important, probably, if you can take away, upskilling, reskilling, all right, for the purpose. I think it's very important. I just attended one meeting just now, just before this, and that is one of the biggest training center in Malaysia. So we were chatting and saying, you know, what's the problem with the young generation? How do we inspire them? So he shared with me that, you know, it's very interesting because his vision is to actually change the way processes are done. You know, how do you train the young generation? And he was sharing with me all the statistics in Asian region, right? So Singapore have a very high digitalization skill set. Malaysia is moving, is already above 50%, but he shared that there's a lot of opportunity, there is a lot of training needed to upskill and reskill them. So I just give you an example, right? Because when we talk about sometimes to the young graduates about corporate governance or even to the young new joinees into the company secretary, one of the things that we always constantly hear is, Samantha, there's already so much work to do. How do we go into corporate governance, right? So much work to do. What are those work? So for example, data entry, minutes writing, but have you ever considered, go and explore, what are the technology out there? I think somebody just shared with me a technology, minutes writing, pump in a recording, complete set of minutes, not the, the Zoom verbatim, it's really good comprehensive minutes, right? So maybe if Sharon can just share a little bit on that. Sorry, before that, is there any question from the floor that you would like to raise? Sorry, can somebody share the mic on my right hand side? Yes.
Thanks. Thank you. Sujatha Shekhar Naik, I chair MICG, the Malaysian Institute of Corporate Governance. I just thought I'd add, it's not so much a question as a comment, because all of you, few of you raised, the code, the MSME governance code, right, that was recently released. So I sit on the SME working group that you were talking about for MICG, and MICG is the secretariat and will be leading the release and implementation of the code. And I thought it's a good opportunity for me to actually make some comments. First, I'm really pleased that you've actually seen that it is a practical, aimed as being practical and scoped for the size, level, scope of the SME, whether it's micro, small, medium enterprise. And the mandatory component, it's more to say that, look, it's not rocket science. You are actually doing a lot of this already, right? Through the legislation that's already there, SSM imposes it, LHDN imposes it. There's a lot that's already there and mandatory. And so not to get too worried and panicked about it. ESG governance specifically, governance is foundational to ESG. And a lot of it is already in play. And then to say how you can then add on and enhance. And the intent is, after this is released, is for the next steps for implementation tools to help MSMEs at whichever level, at different industry sectors, to see how they can actually practicalize it through their operations. And that requires all stakeholders to work together and to help. So I think the SME working group will be working with stakeholders, all of you, right, to get there. So I would like to ask that all of you read it, have a look at the code as it is, and provide your feedback. Because the whole purpose of the consultation is to enhance and make sure it's relevant and practically applicable. So thank you for giving me that little window to come in and ask for that.
Yeah, thank you so much. So it's really great we have someone who's actually in the working group, all right, sharing what their idea, the vision of this whole entire code for the MSME, right? So MISA itself, we have actually sent in our feedback, but the MISA members here, please do feel free to submit if there's any area that you would like to give your feedback on, whether it's MSME, whether it's the e-boss, because we are also collating some of the challenges faced so that we can try and have a forum with the regulators or bodies, right, in terms of trying to see what are the challenges, where are the practical areas, how can we, whether as company secretary or as corporate governance professional, how can we implement it, all right? Sorry, is there any other question from the floor? Any other question from the floor? Yeah, I saw Paul, I saw you walking in. I don't know, maybe would you like to talk a little bit or raise, in terms of the ISSB for the ESG, because that is actually part of the governance right? And it's really something new that there's a lot of consultation paper. Sorry, if somebody can pass the mic over to Paul. 7, table 7.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Paul Chan. I am surprised that you picked me to speak about this. I just walked in, I'm not very sure what was the context of your conversation. But if you talk about ISSB issue, yes, I'm very much involved with that in a global level. I serve in the Integrated Reporting Connectivity Council. The whole objective is actually to connect the financial and non-financial reporting into one single reporting. As you realize today that we talk about corporate reporting, we report financials as separate from the non-financials. We are supposed to have implemented this from January this year, the ISSB, but we are still struggling with connecting these two financial and non-financial reporting to an extent that we are still working on it. In fact, this coming June, we have a meeting in London to try to finalize it. Basically, it's this. So far, we have been reporting on financial and non-financial separately, and it's very difficult for investors to really fully understand what this all encompasses to it. One of the challenges that we have in connecting financial and non-financial is this. The financial accounting standard has its own unique standard, right? They can only take in information if there's a transaction. If there's no transaction in terms of items, they cannot take in information, for example, like intangibles, right? Now that is a challenge that we are also facing, but we are trying to capture it in such a way that we'll be able to identify and value the intangibles. If you don't value the intangibles, you find it conceptually very difficult to make sense out of the corporate reporting. So to answer your questions, we're supposed to come up with the standard by January of this year. Actually, we did come up with a standard, but mainly focused very much on the climate issue, on the scope 1, scope 2. We are not even touching scope 3 at the moment, but we are moving towards that. So in terms of standard, there's a lot of things we need to put together before we can even have a standard. In terms of certification, that's another challenge that we are facing. But having said all these things, we are definitely going ahead with the ISSB.
All right. Thanks so much, Paul. So why I raised that is because SC has also issued a consultation paper on ISSB. And therefore, corporate can no longer ignore the need about ESG because there is financial impact disclosure now, right? Going ahead when the consultation paper, let's say, should it be enforced soon, right? All right. Is there any other question? We still have about 5 more minutes. Yes, gentleman over there, table 6.
Thank you. Norden from the Malaysia Global Business Forum. In Malaysia, what is the percentage of the cost of doing business in terms of compliance? And have we tracked that and has it gone up? And on the flip side of that discussion, what is the benefit of investing into this compliance?
All right. Thank you so much. But I'm not sure. Krishman, would you have some indication on that?
Yeah, I don't have the exact quantum as to the percentage, but it's definitely on the rise. That's something for certain. I think we can hear a lot of grouses from people about cost of compliance increasing every year. But on the flip side, I think it's becoming a prerequisite and essential. As mentioned earlier, companies are part of a broader ecosystem. A lot of companies are looking at it, especially when they onboard vendors, whether have you fulfilled governance requirements, also a prerequisite to induct funds from institutional investors. So there are also positives that comes along with it. But in terms of cost, I think it's increasing, but also on the flip side, it's an enabler to access funding. It's an enabler to gain a broader cohort of business. And also there are many measures to optimize costs with technology, etc. In terms of reporting requirements. There's room to gain economies of scale, economies of scope to minimize costs. So that's about it. But if we look at in terms of specific indicators, like in terms of internal audit costs, yeah, those information are available in the annual report, and more often than not, it's less than 1%. But the total cost of compliance, I think it's a sizable figure and it's increasing, but there are measures to optimize it, and it's also an enabler to gain access to business and also funding. Yeah, maybe I stop there.
Thanks, Krishman. I think that's good feedback. But just for the gentleman information, so in Malaysia, yes, although we talk about compliance costs, but the corporate governance code in Malaysia is not mandatory. It's not a code that you must comply, unlike some other countries in the region. In Malaysia, the regulator believes there's no one size fits all. So therefore, it's apply. You need to disclose how you apply it. If you don't apply certain best practices, then what are your alternatives you put in place to achieve the same objective? So what it meant is, for example, depending on the size of the business, the industry, right? Let's say, for example, you talk about internal audit just now. It could be done in-house. It can be outsourced, all right? So, and that's the reason why I think Krishman mentioned is 1%, because if you compare to other countries in the region, I think actually the cost is much, much higher. Yeah. So Malaysia professional costs, for example, is still on the low side, all right? But maybe I can beat you separately off just to give you an indicator what is the, because we do a lot of IPO. So this is something that a lot of time there are comments that, is it worthwhile to go listing? What is my compliance cost after listing, right? So that's an interesting take in terms of, are we doing too much in terms of the laws, the best practices requirement? But it is actually fantastic. I mean, if you talk about, for example, company secretary, we do a lot of minutes writing. 30 years ago, minutes writing is like maybe 3-5 pages. But currently, if you look at minutes writing, it's really, really very detailed. Because why? I think it's like the source of evidence, how the directors, how the stakeholders carry out your fiduciary duties, right? So I'm not sure, maybe, Swanky, do you want to touch on that?
Absolutely. I think when any, okay, we pray this doesn't happen, but in case any of you have to go to court and at the witness stand, that's where everything comes out, is the source of the evidence itself. So who said what? How was the psyche, the thought process culminating into that decision or indecision? Yeah, so it's really a source of evidence. You can't run away from that. And also now, many companies are also recording. They allow the COSEX to record as well, which I think is very fair. And to record, it means then that it's transparent. There's corporate transparency. And there's a lot of transcribing companies out there as well who do a very good job. Turnaround time, 7 days, 21 days, 14 days. Yes, again, cost of compliance, but it makes business sense. Because if things go wrong, things go south, then you protect yourself. At the end of the day, we all have to protect ourselves. And how best to protect ourselves is to have proper documentation. And we know in courts, all the case laws have said that contemporaneous documents prevails over what oral evidence says. So I can say ABC, but if the documents show XYZ, the courts will say it's XYZ. So that's why get everything into writing. That's really important. It saves yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Swan Kim. So why the reason we talk about compliance costs, right? At the end of the day, like I say, if you look at the requirement, the legal, more of just from the compliance angle and not from the tools angle, then that's where things can go wrong. Very wrong, all right? Because many a time where we come across corporate scandals, they then come to us, Samantha, can you please help us revisit the corporate governance structure, how to put back the corporate governance in place, all right? So penny wise, pound foolish, right? You want to save compliance costs, but when it comes to a corporate scandal, the question will be, how did you, whether it's director or whether it's officer of the company, how did you discharge your duty? Did you put the proper internal controls in place, for example? Right? So that's why we talk about AML, we talk about internal controls just now, right? So maybe, Krishman, as a last one, if
Samantha, maybe I can add a little bit on the gentleman's question about the cost, right? We don't talk about big company first. We talk about MSME and SME. When it comes to compliances, you need to, especially the UBO, you need to search until the end and who's the human there instead of a company. I was lucky that the question being addressed, at least I know why it's UBO, because I was on the C-level before as a fintech company. I'm the person who actually gate whether or not to approve the account or not to approve the account. So previously we were governed by BNM because we are a third-party acquirer. So we have to report under BNM, follow BNM policies. So this is one of the very critical policies. Whenever we see company with company big head, because you need to search until the end. So, but with that come in, costs will definitely increase. So if you, there, what we did was like, what was looking at the search cost, anyhow, we call it EKYC, whatever it is. So you can typically like, if you buy in one or two, it will for sure be very expensive. It will be good that you can actually visit in a bulk purchase, so it will be cheaper. And when it comes to tech, right, tech tools, we're talking about tools. If you want to actually leverage on digitalization, tools is nevertheless is a must. So Malaysia government is actually giving a lot of grants. Given say 1/1 or full grant, you can actually anytime visit the grant. There are a lot out there. So do a search. Yeah, you can probably have some cost saving over there. Yeah, back to you.
thank you, Sharon. I think everybody likes that, right? Can you leverage on that? So there are many grants now encouraging the use of technology. All right, so seriously look at that. And sorry, unfortunately, time is running out. I wanted to perhaps talk about internal audit, how you can actually review your processes, right? In terms of making sure, in terms of governance excellence, you are there. But unfortunately, I have to end the session now. Perhaps maybe if I can just invite the panelists here, just to close off our session, if you wanted to, perhaps your last word of wisdom, right, in terms of governance excellence to our audience, Kenneth?
Closing remark, because I will still stick back to fundamentals. At the end of the day, good governance is always about accountability and responsibility. So, as governance professionals, we have to be seen playing that role. We ourselves have to be accountable and responsible. Yeah?
Thank you. Sanki?
I think no amount of money is too much for compliance because it really makes business sense. You always look at the end in mind in case things go wrong. So you know you have had everything. So for example, for this professional association, which I'm the treasurer of, it's under ROS, Registrar of Societies. There doesn't need to be an external auditor. You know, the law just says it's internal auditor, enough. Then you do your AGM. But we still engage external auditors. We spend on the professionals. We have to, we want to, so that we look transparent to our members and you have that trust on us, the office bearers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Someone once said it's difficult to attain perfection, but if you strive for perfection, you will achieve excellence. So on that note, I encourage all corporate governance professionals to continue to push the envelope and raise the gold standards in terms of corporate governance. It's an organic process and continuous improvement is key. Explore new practices. I think before Samantha handed over the mic for the final remark, she mentioned about internal audit on corporate governance. So this is a novel practice, is something unconventional. People typically do internal audit on sales, on marketing, etc., on payroll, but very rarely someone does audit on boardroom governance process. So this is something unconventional, but increasingly should be pursued. In fact, some of my friends, I asked them, would you like to do internal audit on boardroom governance? They say, I'll do it 2 or 3 years before my retirement. They are so scared they get fired because they're dealing with high stature professionals. But these are practices that should be explored.
All right, thanks, Krishman.
Okay, I'm going to end with a short one. So my advice here is digitalization and AI is going to be here to stay, like it or not. The only thing you can change is to change. Back to you, Samantha.
Okay. Thank you so much. So let's give all of them a hand. I think it's really been great insight from all the four industry leaders here. All right, it's really, really great. I hope that all of you have listened to all the sharings, right? And think about implementation. All right, I think just now somebody mentioned pragmatic solutions, leveraging on technology. All right, so let's say, I think we always hear the word that everything that is, for sure, right? And they always say, tax is for sure, right? But actually, how come nobody used the word corporate governance is here to stay, whether you like it or not, right? Now, it's not just public listed, MSME, you have to look at moving the bar up for corporate governance excellence. Thank you so much.